The sun had just begun to set beyond the red cliffs of Dry River Valley when the echo of a desperate cry broke through the silence. "Cowboy! The rocks have me! Please don't let me die here!" It was the kind of sound that rips straight through the soul. The kind of voice that pulls a man from his saddle and makes his heart forget its beat. Ethan Ward, a lone rider with dust on his hat and pain buried deep in his chest, turned his horse toward the canyon wall where the cry came from. He'd ridden these lands for years, chasing shadows of his past, but he'd never heard desperation like this before. As the wind dragged across the plain, he spotted her, a woman pinned between the rocks, her pale dress torn, blood trailing down her arm, eyes wide with fear and yet burning with life. He jumped off his horse, boots thudding against the ground, dust swirling around him like the breath of the desert itself. The world felt still, except for the sound of her weak voice whispering, "Please don't let me die here. I'll follow you wherever you ride." Those words struck him harder than a bullet. They carried something sacred, trust, surrender, and the weight of two broken souls meeting in the middle of nowhere. Ethan knelt beside her, pressing his calloused hands against the cold stone, trapping her leg. "You're not dying here, ma'am," he said softly, his voice trembling with a strength he hadn't felt in years. "Not while I still breathe." He grabbed a lever of wood from his saddle pack, forcing it under the boulder. With every push, his muscles screamed, his heart pounded. But his mind kept replaying her voice, "Don't let me die here." Finally, the rock shifted and she gasped, pulling her leg free. He lifted her in his arms, as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. The desert wind howled like a wounded beast, but inside that moment, it felt like time itself had bowed to their will. They rode toward his cabin on the edge of the valley. The night grew colder, stars flickering like the eyes of ghosts watching from the heavens. Her name was Clara Rose, and she spoke with a softness that belonged to a gentler world. As he wrapped her wound with a torn strip of his bandana, she looked at him and whispered, "You saved me, but why?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He stared into the fire, watching the flames lick the wood, remembering another woman, a face lost to time, a promise broken by fate. "Because once," he finally said, "I couldn't save someone who called for me. I ain't making that mistake twice." The silence that followed was deep, the kind that holds meaning heavier than words. Clara watched him with eyes that saw right through his rough edges. In the crackle of firelight, she noticed the scar across his hand, the weary lines around his mouth, the grief buried in his gaze. Yet beneath all that dust and solitude, she saw a man who'd been waiting for redemption, maybe without even knowing it. Days passed. Ethan tended her wound, taught her how to feed the horses, how to listen to the wind before a storm. They spoke little, but in the spaces between words, something grew, something neither could name. The desert, harsh and endless, became a witness to their quiet healing. Each morning, Clara would stand outside, watching him saddle his horse, her voice soft as dawn. "Where do you ride to every morning?" He'd smile faintly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Nowhere in particular. Just ridin', to keep the ghosts quiet." She didn't ask whose ghosts. They both had their own. One night, while the coyotes cried and the fire burned low, Clara said, "If I ever get strong again, I'll follow you wherever you ride." He looked up then, meeting her gaze across the dim glow, and for the first time in years, Ethan smiled, a real smile, fragile but alive. But peace never lasts long in a land like that. One morning, a band of riders appeared from the east, men with cold eyes and restless hands. They were searching for Clara, accusing her of running away from a man she was forced to marry. Ethan stood in front of her cabin door, rifle in hand, the morning sun lighting the dust in golden fire. "She ain't going nowhere with you," he said, voice low and steady. The men laughed, thinking one cowboy couldn't stand against 5 armed riders. But the thing about men like Ethan Ward is, they've got nothing left to lose. The first shot cracked like thunder. By the time the smoke cleared, only the wind dared to move. The men were gone, scattered or broken, and Ethan stood bleeding from his shoulder, rifle smoking in his hand. Clara ran to him, tears mixing with dust. "You can't keep saving me. Ethan, you'll die one day for someone who doesn't deserve it. He looked at her with that quiet strength again and whispered, "Then I reckon I'll die doing what feels right." The wound didn't kill him, but it left him weaker. Clara stayed by his side, caring for him the way he once cared for her. Each dawn she'd whisper, "I'll follow you wherever you ride," and he'd answer, "Then ride with me when the sun's up again." In the end, when Ethan finally healed, they saddled 2 horses and rode out together, the horizon stretching wide and golden before them. The land didn't promise peace, but it promised freedom, and for 2 souls broken by life, that was enough. As they disappeared into the sunset, Clara turned her head slightly, smiling at the sound of the wind. "Guess you were right. Cowboy, the rocks didn't take me." He grinned back, "No, ma'am. Not while I'm still breathing." The screen fades slowly, the sky turning into fire, and a soft narrator's voice echoes, "Sometimes saving one life saves 2. Sometimes the road you ride isn't about where you're going, but who's riding with you?"